Chapter 8.1. Today we're going to talk about the irregular presents. Why we talk about irregularities? Irregularities happen in languages, basically in situations or in verbs that we use them very often. For example, in Spanish, most of the irregularities that you will find will be in the present tense or in the preterito or past tense. Why? Because we use them very often. For example, we have here the most common irregularities in Spanish are in the what we call in the stem changes. And basically the stem means that the last part is the part that we usually use to form the present or the future or any other tense. And the root of the verb is what we call the stem. We call it in Spanish radical. And here in this part is where we have the irregularities. So you will see that, for example, the verb querer should be yo quiero, tú quieres, él quiere, nosotros queremos. But what happens when you use this very often? Well, usually it could happen something like quiero, 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 quiero. So from quiero, it changes to quiero. Why? Because probably we use it and eventually becomes the role. The same thing, for example, with dormir. Dormo, 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 dormo. So from dormir, from yo dormo, becomes yo duermo. These irregularities are in the stem, and all these verbs, they have some characteristics in common, and there is no rule about the verbs that they have the irregularity or not. So you have to learn one by one, and if you know the verb belongs to that group, you have to do these stem changes. For example, in the first group we have, and we have three groups for this. The first group, basically the E that you have in querer, it changes to IE in the forms yo, tú, él, ella, usted, and ellos, ellas, and ustedes. You will see that doesn't happen in nosotros and vosotros. This is affecting verbs like querer, which means to want, defender, which means to defend, mentir, which is to lie, extender, to extend, sentir, to feel, apretar, to tie something, divertirse, to have fun, to enjoy, and preferir, to prefer. Well, these verbs and many others, you will have to do these stem changes because these verbs are very common. We use them often in Spanish, and then you will see that when you conjugate them, you cannot say, for example, yo quiero. It has to be yo quiero. That's the stem change. So in this group, for example, when you conjugate querer, you have yo quiero, tú quieres, él, ella, usted quiere, and then we have nosotros queremos. You see here we didn't change the stem. Vosotros queréis, and then we have ellos, ellas, ustedes quieren. This is the first group, and here what happens is that the E changes to IE. Now, the second group we have is the O changes to UE. In this case, you have verbs like dormir, to sleep, mostrar, to show, probar, to try, volver, to return, and volar, to flight. Also, we have the verb jugar. You know, the verb jugar doesn't have an O, it has a U, but it works like this group, in this group. So, for example, when you conjugate dormir, I sleep, so you say yo duermo, yo sleep, tú duermes, él, ella, usted duerme, nosotros dormimos, vosotros dormís, ellos, ellas duermen. Again, you see we do it with the yo, the tú, the él, ella, usted, ellos, ellas, and ustedes, but we don't change in nosotros and vosotros. So the same thing that happened in the first group is happening also in the second group. And then we have a third group, and in this group, what happens is that we have the E here in these verbs changes to I. So for example, servir, to serve, vestir, to get dressed, pedir, to ask, and medir, to measure. When you conjugate this verb, for example, I ask is yo pido, tú pides, él, ella, usted pide, nosotros pedimos, vosotros pedís, ellos, ellas, ustedes piden. You see here in the nosotros and vosotros form, we don't change the E to I. Okay, so we keep it like that. So most of the irregularities in the present tense happen basically with the stem changes. So this group of verbs, basically what you have to do is to make sure that the infinitive changes what you have in the radical, have to be changed when you conjugate the verb in the present tense. And remember, this only happens in the present tense. When you conjugate, for example, in the future, it's going to be a different rules, different structure. But for the present, this is what has to be done. Okay. Now, besides that, we have also other irregularities. So, for example, in this case, you have these verbs right here. All these you have to check in the book, in the digital book you have for the class. But for this group, here you have hacer, conducir, poner, tener, valer. All these verbs, when you conjugate them, you will see that you don't say yo hago, no, you say yo hago. So the yo form is different. The rest of the verb is going to be okay. The rest of the verb, you just apply the rule we saw when we conjugated the regular verbs and will work. But for this group of verbs, the yo form is going to be a little bit different, okay? So it's going to be yo hago, yo conduzco, yo pongo, yo tengo, yo valgo. So just make sure that you read all of them because, the way it should be conjugated is different from the way that has to be done, okay? For example, traer, traigo, caer, caigo, caber, quepo, saber, sé, decir, digo, and venir, vengo, okay? So this is another group of irregularities, and then we're going to see another group, the third group right here. Well, in this group, what happens is that these verbs, all of them, for example, are ending with ther and thir, right here, right? So, for example, you have verbs like vencer, right? So what happens is that if you conjugate this the way it should be done, well, you will have to say yo vengo, because this will be an O right here, and so the conjugation will be vengo, but the infinitive is vencer, vengo. So in order to make the yo form similar to the infinitive, instead of using a C, we use a C. So we say yo venzo, vencer, venzo. So it's done to basically to match with the sound that we have in the infinitive. Okay. The same thing with verbs ending with get and gir. So in this case, the G changes to J in the yo form only. So you have dirigir, you have dirijo. Otherwise, if you were using the G, you will say dirigo. No, dirigo is very different from dirigir. So dirigir, if you put it with a J, you have dirigir, you have dirijo. Okay, and then we have the endings with gir. Okay, G-U-I-R. In this case, you remove the U and you have the G only. So seguir, so you have sigo. Because if you leave the U right there, you have siguo, because the U will sound in this case. So what you do in this group in particular is to drop the U. So you have seguir, you have sigo. So those are the three groups of irregularities more common in Spanish. So make sure that you do these changes when you conjugate the present tense, because otherwise you will get something that is incorrect. So it has to be done. So let's work a little bit more on the use of Spanish. For example, if you want to say something like to speak, how do you say to speak? Hablar. How do you say I speak? Yo hablo. How do you say to eat? Comer. How do you say she eats? Ella come. How do you say to live? Vivir. How do you say we live in New York? Nosotros vivimos en Nueva York. How do you say to drink? Beber. How do you say we drink Coca-Cola? Nosotros bebemos Coca-Cola. How do you say to eat? Comer. How do you say I eat pizza? Yo como pizza. How do you say I want? Yo quiero. Remember, in this case, you have to change the stem, so it has to be yo quiero. How do you say you want? Tú quieres. How do you say they want? Ellos quieren. Okay? How do you say we want? Nosotros queremos. You see, in this case, I don't change the infinitive. I say queremos. We say queremos. The change has to be because it's the nosotros form. How do you say we want to eat pizza? Nosotros queremos comer pizza. We want to study. Nosotros queremos estudiar. You see, when you form a sentence in Spanish and you have two verbs, like in this case, we want to eat, okay? You conjugate the first one. Nosotros queremos. The second one stays infinitive. So it has to be nosotros queremos comer. Nosotros queremos estudiar. Nosotros queremos viajar. So the second verb is going to be always ending with an R because it's going to be infinitive and we only conjugate the first verb. Okay? For example, how do you say he wants to eat? Él quiere comer. How do you say he wants the car? The car. Él quiere el coche. So in this case, it's not something he wants to do, it's when he wants an object. In this case, you have the verb querer and then you have the object. Él quiere el coche. How do you say he wants to eat the hamburger? Él quiere comer la hamburguesa. Well, how do you say he wants to eat the hamburger with Peter? Él quiere comer la hamburguesa with Pedro. How do you say he wants to eat the hamburger with Peter in the red car? Él quiere comer la hamburguesa con Pedro en el coche rojo. Okay? How do you say I sleep? I sleep. Yo duermo. I sleep 2 hours. Yo duermo 2 horas. How do you say she sleeps? Ella duerme. How do you say we sleep? Nosotros dormimos. You see, in this case, nosotros dormimos. Dormimos, in this case, doesn't change, okay? How do you say I ask? Yo pido. How do you say you ask? Tú pides. How do you say we ask? Nosotros pedimos. You see, nosotros doesn't change. How do you say we ask for the check? Nosotros pedimos la cuenta. You are in a restaurant, you ask the check. Por favor, deme la cuenta. Okay? Nosotros pedimos la cuenta. Okay? How do you say to serve? Servir. We serve the meal. Nosotros servimos la comida. How do you say to ask? To ask, but not a question, to ask for something. In this case is nosotros pedimos. How do you say I ask? Yo pido. How do you say he ask? Él pide. How do you say we ask for a beer? Nosotros pedimos una cerveza. How do you say to dress? to get dressed. Vestir. How do you say she dress the children? Ella viste a los niños. Don't forget, because it's the kids, right? How do you say to sleep? Dormir. How do you say I sleep? Yo duermo. How do you say to try something on? To try. Probar. I try the dress. Yo pruebo el vestido. How do you say to return? Volver. I return to New York. Yo vuelvo a Nueva York.